Cool. So, hello again. I'm going to be talking about what we think and know about flow states, specifically in creative contexts, and focusing on some of the key considerations for experiencing it. And I guess the main disclaimer is that there's not a lot of evidence, even though flow has been going for 50 years in terms of its research, in terms of the concept itself. So a lot of the talk is really about theories, about what's happening in the brain, and in the mind, and in actions. So I'm going to just be covering what is flow. Flow specifically in creative contexts, because it's not always creative. In fact, most of the research looks at non-creative contexts. Is flow always good? And also a study that we're doing called the Creative Flow and Wellbeing Study. So what is flow to start with? We see characteristics of flow in a lot of movies that you might have seen. So The Matrix on the top left, you've got Whiplash at the bottom left, and you've got Limitless on the right. And I guess these behaviours are kind of this reduction in evaluating or monitoring or checking. They're much more fluent and fluid. And I guess like a popular term for flow is in the zone, or I'm zoned in. So if you heard someone say that, usually they're talking about flow. That's usually what I say when someone asks me, what are you doing your PhD? And I say, have you ever heard of in the zone? Because no one knows what flow is, it seems. If we think about the actual characteristics, you've got the state and then you've got the triggers. So the state really focuses on high focus, so being completely absorbed to the point where you can't really think about anything else, or you're not thinking about anything else. And your actions and thoughts are kind of happening almost automatically. Okay, and this is very enjoyable. And some of the triggers that have been looked at in the research are mainly on optimal challenge, so thinking about making sure the task isn't too hard or too easy, it's just perfectly in the middle. You've got to have a clear goal. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to be able to diagnose your progress. So if you don't know how well you're doing, then you're probably going to get lost and lose that attention. And you've got to be skilled and motivated in the task as well. Okay, I mean, most of these examples that I'm showing you in the video clips, I mean, they're literally like supernatural humans, and someone's taken a drug to get there. But in sober reality, if you can meet these conditions on the left, then you're more likely to experience a flow state in whatever activity you're doing. And the research, what does the research say? So there's about 2,000 to 3,000 studies on flow in the past 40 years, according to a recent review of the past 40 years of flow research. And myself and a master's student last year looked at how many of these are in creative contexts or arts contexts, and we found 84. So there really is basically, there's just not a lot to go on, to be honest, when we think about flow in these kind of more open-ended contexts. And actually most of these were in music. Well, I've got nothing against that, but it means that there was only 11 in the visual arts. So there's only 11 studies that we could find in the visual arts that actually measure flow. And also a lot of the music studies were looking at elite music, so classical music, performance. So, I mean, performing a pre-made piece of music in an orchestra, is it creative? I don't know. It's like it's a pre-formulated activity, right? You're not generating anything. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done. And I'm going to be talking next about some of the theories behind how flow occurs in creative contexts. Okay, so let's first define what a creative context actually is. So a creative context, is that going to work? They're meant to be videos, but oh well. Creative context, you're generating a novel idea or action, okay? The rules about how you do those actions are flexible, and the outcomes are usually unknown when you start. Whereas a non-creative context, Tetris is a good example. It's one we use a lot in flow research to get people into flow. They're predetermined ideas or actions. there's no point in bending the rules. You're not going to win Tetris if you try and change the rules. They're fixed. And so is the outcome, so is the goal, okay? So this is a sort of simple way that me and Pete over here we published some work about this to try to sort of separate, or what's the difference between these activities? Because most of the flow research is done in the bottom half there, in the non-creative contexts. And another thing we need to think about is actions occur in sequences. So if we look at this as George Day from the band called Jungle, just practicing drums, and if we consider each drum hit as a separate stage in a sequence, okay, this is how I'm going to frame the next few slides, okay? So we can imagine thoughts and actions occurring in sequences, and they usually occur below the level of awareness or control, a bit like walking. You don't think about each footstep, you just kind of do it. However, you must choose how you're going to perform that sequence. There are options, okay? There are more ways than one to perform those actions and thoughts. And if we've got some sort of fixed goal or fixed outcome that would represent success or something we think is good, that makes it much easier to get to. However, you've still got to consider the best route to get there, okay? You can't do all of them. And this is a bit of a problem for flow, because when you're faced with all these choices, or all these options that you have to choose from in order to do the best action, you have to be deliberate and very considerate. It's not exactly fluid or intuitive, is it? When you have to kind of break the process and consider what you're doing, unless you're incredibly skilled. So we need to think about ways to prune this. And as you master an activity, you get much better at pruning the roots. And this is really kind of what makes artists distinct from one another, right? They've pruned their options. They've pruned their actions to become recognizable to themselves. Okay, so this is the big problem for creatives. What if the outcome is open? What if there isn't one right way to make an artwork? This is where it starts to get tricky, because there are a lot of very efficient routes to good outcomes, but you still have to choose which one you want to get to, right? You need to make those choices. There's not someone telling you this is how you do it, and this is how you get to it. And I guess the first bit of research that sort of starts to think about this problem is thinking that flow may actually really be occurring at the later stages of the creative process, assuming that the later stages of the creative process of making an artwork or whatever it is, a lot of the pruning has already been done, right? So you've already kind of narrowed down your idea and you're kind of polishing it, or you're sort of doing the fine-tuning, whereas at the start you're usually sort of generating new ideas and you're kind of jumping between ideas, which it's an assumption, Some artists might not work like that, but that's one proposal that was made actually literally last week in a new article. And another is that creatives adopt internal cues, like emotions, and they use inspiration in order to make these decisions. And that's another thing that makes artworks unique to one another, or artworks unique between artists, because everyone's emotions are different. And this would make sense because a lot of other research looking at emotional intelligence, mindfulness, attentional control, curiosity, uncertainty tolerance as a personality trait suggests that these people that are high in these traits experience more flow. So it might be that artists or people that have to engage in creative flow, they have these attributes because they need to use internal cues to direct their process. Okay. And again, we've written about this in our recent article as well. How am I doing for time? Okay, good. So that's some ideas about sort of flow in the creative process, but unfortunately we still are at the idea stage, and I'll talk a bit about a study that we're doing to try to get to the bottom of some of these as well. But before I do that, I think we need to really consider, is flow always good? Because it's got a very positive association, especially when you look at those kind of movies that you saw before. It's always quite positive. But there's a lot of recent research that is kind of going against this. So I guess the first thing is flow-inducing activities, or activities that we usually experience flow in, they give us the opportunity for enjoyment, and we're usually motivated to go back to them when we've been in flow in them before. However, the extreme end of this is addiction. And also the inability to judge or evaluate whether the activities align with our values or bigger plans is very high when we're so immersed in an activity. Okay, so we've all been doom scrolling before, right? That's probably because we're in flow. And when you can't get out of that doom scrolling feeling, yeah, that's because you're so absorbed in it. The picture here that we can see on the right, it was a really interesting study that started to look at the sort of negative reasons for flow, and it looked at a group of motorbike gangs that would basically be street racing in Japan. It was a big cultural problem. You were getting about 100 young people dying a year from street racing, and the government really wanted to understand, why are they doing it? It's super risky. There's no kind of external rewards or outcomes that come from it. Why are they doing it? And this was really before positive psychology was a thing. And what they found was that it was because, what they described, it was because they were experiencing flow. They got this really rewarding experience just from doing it, as opposed to doing it for some external reason. And the other thing is thinking about, exercise addiction. This has also been linked with flow quite a lot. A new idea is that flow causes tunnel vision. And this also resonates with my experience. But what was found in a recent study by Lavoie and Main is that your cognitive flexibility is reduced after you've had a flow experience. So what this means is that your ability to switch between different modes of thinking or different concept is actually reduced after you've experienced flow in one activity. So what this might mean is that flow is really good at getting you into a certain mode of thinking for a certain type of activity, but it's not good if you need to jump to the next one straight afterwards. So these are some of the kind of early research studies that literally have just been published in the past couple of weeks that start to think about the sort of timeline of flow within a lifestyle, right? When is it really good and when is it also bad for you as well? We are conducting one of the first studies on some of these issues and thinking about flow's effects on well-being. Some studies show that flow causes depression and anxiety as well as positive well-being. We can't just assume it's always positive. But I think it really depends on the context. And given the lack of research in creative activities and flow, this is a study that if you are interested in yourselves, you're more than welcome to take part. There's two versions. There is a 10-minute version and a 2-week version. And we'll also be giving people feedback about what their responses mean and how they compare to others. And this is the summary. So I guess I'm summarizing, remember, based on theories and ideas. We don't have evidence yet, a lot of evidence. But I guess the first thing is that listening to and understanding internal cues seems to be quite an important thing for experiencing flow in creative context. In order to make the process more fluid and intuitive, you need to be able to read your emotions because they'll help you make decisions. The second thing is that we should consider whether flow-inducing activities align with your wider goals. I do things that I enjoy that are not always good for me. I like eating chocolate, right? But it doesn't mean it's good for me. It doesn't mean I should do it all the time. Okay, so I think we need to think about, is a flow-inducing activity an opportunity for escape, or is it an opportunity for growth and development? And this is definitely a pre-consideration that we should be thinking about, as opposed to just assuming flow is always good. We also want to know when in the sequence of your process flow is good. It might not be good at the start, and we might not really, maybe we shouldn't be encouraging people to just get in flow all the time when it's actually going to stop you from jumping between ideas, when that's a really important stage in the early part of the creative process. And also, consider what you're doing after experiencing flow. Okay. And that wraps my talk up. So yeah, if there are any questions, fire away.